Winsted, Connecticut, Home Sweet Home. Home Sweet Home is based on a Sicilian melody. Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. This is episode 17 of Make Winsted Great Again. If you're running for office, Town Manager Robert Geiger would like you to see him before you talk to any members of the staff in Town Hall. See Bob first. Tell him who you're going to talk to. We're getting closer to the election now. Got a month or so to go. The election's on November 7th. And I am running for office. I'm running for the selectmen. But I really want to be on the finance board. I'm not too interested in the decisions the selectmen make, but I am very interested in the decisions the finance board makes because we have a financial problem in our town and have had for many years. I will be on the Trump Winsted ticket on the ballot, and last week I told you that I would, in response to the comments by the Democratic Town Committee chairperson and the Republican Town Committee chairperson, reported in the Waterbury Republican article about me and my candidacy, written by their reporter, Kurt Moffat. So now I will talk to you a bit about my own background, which is quite different than theirs and quite different than most people running for office in this election. You might get bored with all this, so I advise you to turn the channel and watch a baseball game or some other movie on television rather than listen to this. And please don't vote for me in the November election if you haven't listened to this program. My background basically, since birth, covers 8 areas. My youth, up through 8th grade at the Midget Avenue School in Torrington, Connecticut. Trade school, Oliver Wolcott Technical School in Torrington, Connecticut for a year and a half. And then I transferred to high school, Torrington High School, and finished there for various reasons, which I'll explain. I then went to the Swain School of Design for a year and a half in New Bedford, Massachusetts. I then worked for G. Fox & Company in Hartford, Connecticut as a commercial artist for a year and a half before attending Kansas University in Lawrence, Kansas, majoring in mathematics, and then moving into the business world. I was accepted at law school, but decided not to go because I didn't want to spend 3 more years in school. And I didn't see myself as being a very good lawyer. But in those days, everybody wanted you to be a lawyer, a doctor, or an Indian chief. So I applied to the Kansas University Law School and was accepted. I interviewed around the country for jobs using my mathematical ability. They weren't very high-paying jobs. They were for insurance companies and other places like that needed mathematicians. But I found out rather quickly from other students that were applying to the computer industry that the computer industry was just getting off the ground. They needed people who had a math background. They also preferred people who had an artistic background and a math background. So I was very lucky. I just lucked into that. So I went to Kansas City, and I interviewed at IBM Corporation, International Business Machines, which was the big employer at the time, and I took their test, the IBM test. This test was given all over the country by everybody who wanted to hire computer programmers or potential computer programmers that had the right background and wanted to enter the computer business. And when I went to Kansas City, I flunked the test. So I went back to the Kansas University campus and asked a lot of people who had taken the test, what were the questions, do you remember, and what were the answers? Now, the part I couldn't pass had nothing to do with mathematics or computers. They wanted to know who a bull and a bear was on Wall Street and all kinds of questions like that. They wanted you to be well-rounded. And, of course, in those days, I didn't know any of that. A friend of mine, Joe Palmentero, had gotten a job with Douglas Aircraft in Santa Monica, California. He had a car, and he was leaving Lawrence, Kansas to go to his job at Douglas Aircraft. So I decided to hitch a ride with him. I went out to Douglas Aircraft with him. We rented an apartment, and I applied for a job at Douglas Aircraft. I got the job because they gave me the same test that I took in Kansas City when I applied to IBM, and I passed it with flying colors because I knew the answers. I remembered the questions and answers that I reviewed with the people at Kansas University. I was offered the job, and I had to pass a high-level security clearance examination by Douglas Aircraft. They went to my hometown and interviewed people and other areas that I had lived in around the country in the past. That was all scheduled to take 3 to 6 months. So during that period, I was placed into a programming school at Douglas Aircraft to learn the brand new programming language called Fortran, which was for mathematical type applications. There was another program being developed at the time called COBOL, which was more for business application development. Later in my career, I met the developer of COBOL, Grace Hopper. She was a Smith College graduate. She was old at the time and in the Navy. I met her when I worked for Sperry Rand on a trip to Washington, D.C., where she was headquartered. Douglas Aircraft was using the Bendix Q9 computer system for their application. And that utilized Fortran, so we all had to learn it before we could actually do any programs for the Skybolt missile application. I rented an apartment for Joyce and I in Venice, California. And while I was taking the course, President Kennedy canceled the Skybolt missile program. So everybody from the vice president of that division, as I remember, that was about 1,000 to 2,000 people, the whole section of the company that was working on the Skybolt missile program, except me. They sent me to a trailer outside, and I went into the trailer. There were several engineers there working and a manager. And I was there for about a month because they didn't realize that I was on the Skybolt missile program. During that time, I went out and I looked for a job. I interviewed around Santa Monica. I again took the IBM test and passed it admirably and was offered a job by an offshoot of one of the best think tanks in the United States at the time, the Rand Corporation. And that was for an application with the Air Force. The application was called the SAGE system, Semi-Automatic Ground Environment, where they monitored the aircraft in the air over the United States, looking for enemy aircraft, tracking all the commercial aircraft, flight plans, etc. I often wonder why this didn't catch the people at 9/11, but for one reason or another it didn't. But I was working with the Air Force, and that was in Phoenix, Arizona. Well, first I had, again, to learn another programming language to be able to work on the IBM 7090, which was one of their first machines. It had 16K of memory at the time. And, of course, it was all vacuum tube computers. And there was a duplex system in case one didn't work, they switched to the other. If a vacuum tube was weak on the computer, 1 and 1 didn't often equal 2. So you had to switch to the standby computer and use that while they found out why 1 and 1 didn't equal 2 on the prime computer. This computer was programmed in C, the C language, so I had to learn that. To correct bugs, we had to read dumps of binary and try to figure out what the problem was, then do a punch card and read it into the machine to correct the problem for the next mass test. And we had mass tests every day for a couple hours where everybody put in all their correctors to their programs and then they were tested. I spent my spare time on my own and wrote a program that threw out correctors, octal punch card correctors, from the online test if they weren't working properly and were goofing up those trying to test. Luke Air Force Base was a highly secure computer installation out in the desert, and you couldn't get in without having a top secret security clearance. When visitors came, they also had to have a top secret security clearance. So Joyce and I drove out there after I finished the programming test in Santa Monica, got my security clearance, and I worked there for a year and a half or so until I was offered another opportunity that paid more and gave me a lot more challenge, working at NASA in Greenbelt, Maryland, the Goddard Space Flight Center. This was on a UNIVAC computer, so I had to go to Washington, D.C., take another course while I was waiting again for my security clearance on how to program the UNIVAC computer. They used a different programming language than the other. This was more done in machine language rather than high-level language. After finishing the course in Washington, D.C. at the UNIVAC headquarters and waiting around in Greenbelt, Maryland for my security clearance to come into effect, I was recruited to join another company, Philco Ford, which had a job down at the Glencoe Naval Station in Glencoe, Georgia. So there I went. I took that job and I stayed there over a year programming the Navy Tactical Defense System. And some of the other programs I worked with were also jet pilots because that was a jet pilot base for the Navy. And they would fly over to Vietnam, and when they weren't flying and weren't in combat, they would also program the computers. After a year or so, when most of my work was finished, I interviewed for a job with Sperry Rand because I knew their equipment and their programming language, and I was offered a job of a choice at Copenhagen, Denmark, on the SAS, Scandinavian Airlines System, computer system development, or in London, England, on the British European Airways system that was being developed by the UNIVAC division of Sperry Rand. I chose England because I had a big background through my life of reading Sherlock Holmes books, and I knew a lot about England. Didn't know much about Copenhagen. Later I'll tell you a bit more about the Copenhagen system, but first I'll tell you what happened in London. I was recruited by the UNIVAC International Airlines Center in London, England, in Paddington, to help program, design, etc., the British European Airways reservation system. After waiting several months for the government paperwork to be processed to get an American in work in London, I went down and I worked on the British European Airways system, and I became a program project manager because they saw that I had ability to manage people, deal with the customer, and all of the support groups within UNIVAC, Division of Sperry Rand, that I had that capability. So they made me a project manager. I was about 30 years old at the time. Now, a lot of those skills came from working through life since the age of 11, from working my way through school system, learning from my bosses, learning from the customers, etc., etc., etc. So I consider that to be very lucky part of my career. From there, I was sent on an emergency project to Copenhagen, where I spent almost a year, in Denmark, trying to turn a system from bad to good because it wasn't working properly and the customer was thinking about quitting. When I was there, the president and CEO of Sperry UNIVAC, who was headquartered in Pennsylvania, flew over, and I gave him a presentation of all the things that need to be done within our company and within the customer operation to make the system a success. And he said, "Brian, whatever you need, you just tell me and I'll get it for you. If it means taking a machine off the assembly line, if it means taking a higher priority on some software development within our company, we'll do that. We'll get you what you need to save this customer." The customer had flown the CEO over on a Scandinavian Airlines plane to attend this meeting. He brought a whole bunch of vice presidents with him that were trying not to be blamed for the problems at Scandinavian Airlines. And that was a big step for me because from then on, whenever he had a problem, a customer in trouble, and they needed a good project manager or program manager to turn the situation around, he called for me and asked me to go here or there, hither and yon, at a moment's notice. And that happened quite frequently in the early days when systems were sold throughout the world, and quite frequently in the early days when systems were sold before they were properly developed and tested, and they needed a good project manager or program manager to turn the situation around, he called for me and asked me to go here or there, hither and yon, at a moment's notice to help save the customer. And the reason he wanted to save the customer, I did ask him why he wanted to save the customer. He said, because if we lose the customer, IBM will get all future airlines, future banks, future whatever business it is we lose. And it would cost much more money to get another one of these systems sold than it does to save the one that's in trouble. That was the beginning of my executive positioning in large corporations that needed my skills, my management abilities, my technical abilities, my dedication, my lifestyle, etc. That was the beginning. When that CEO of Sperry Rand came to visit us at Scandinavian Airlines, saw my presentation, and knew that he needed that kind of skill throughout the company. My work at Scandinavian Airlines led UNIVAC, Division of Sperry Rand, to have me project manage the installation in Rome, Italy, of the CETA high-level network. CETA stands for a group of 11 telecommunications companies that had a network connecting all their information, and was called Societe International Telecommunications Association. Joyce and I moved to Rome. We stayed there for 6 months or so, maybe a little more or less. Got the project off the ground and almost to completion when I was asked to go back to London and be the Director of Planning and Control for the newly established UNIVAC International Real-Time Center in the Paddington section of London. We serviced many airlines around Europe, Germany, Iberia, Lufthansa, all these airlines, with a real-time operating system that was designed by the famous designer Ed Mack at the time. And I was the Director of Planning and Control, trying to plan everything, get everything done on time, go to customers when they got in trouble, all that kind of thing. It was a big step forward for me. While I was there, one of the big financial directors in the company, Jeffrey R. Cross, came through the installation and was impressed with my planning and control techniques. I was using the new programs CPM and PERT, P-E-R-T, new in those days, to help plan all the projects and the development efforts and installation efforts, etc., and manage them. Later, Jeffrey R. Cross became Vice President of the Americas Division of UNIVAC. He was so impressed with my work in London that he recruited me to come and be the Director of Planning and Control for the Americas Division of UNIVAC. And that led to my next job, which was in America as the Director of Planning Control for the Americas Division of Sperry Rand, which covered Canada, America, and South America. And I was the leader and manager of all their real-time operations and computer operations throughout Canada, America, and South America. It was a big job. Made a lot of money, had a lot of responsibility, spent a lot of time there. And one of the systems we did was the first police computer system in Pennsylvania. Major Quietech was the customer, and it was out right near Hershey, PA. When I first joined the Americas Division as the Director of Planning Control of everything in Canada, America, and South America, I was handed a list of all the dissatisfied customers in the area by my boss, who had set up a war room in Pennsylvania at our headquarters with a war room coordinator. And every week we went over all the dissatisfied customers, and we have to figure out what we had to do to save them, because again, Jerry Probst, who was president of UNIVAC Division of Sperry Rand at the time, didn't want to lose a customer, just like the last president didn't when he came to Copenhagen. So I had a team, and we went around the country supporting all the projects, finding out what the real problems were, and getting them the help they needed at the next meeting the next week back in Pennsylvania. So I did a lot of flying around America, Canada, and South America. I had a couple experts with me, always. Technical expert, management expert. Sometimes I had to put people into the site to run them. And then I would fax the information back to the war room, and they would take action and spread it around to the rest of the company. So I got to meet a lot of people. I did the NASA sites all over. I did all kinds of interesting things and got a lot of exposure while I was there. One day I was visiting Major Quietech in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania State Police system that I mentioned to you earlier. And I got a call in the hotel early in the morning from Jeffrey R. Cross, my financially astute boss, and he said he was leaving UNIVAC and going to be the president and chief executive officer of International Computers Limited in London, England. I felt very bad about that because I really respected him. When he got over there, a few months into his tenure, he called myself and the design expert, Ed Mack. He asked us to come over to interview for a job at International Computers Limited in London. Ed Mack would report directly to him, and I would be the Director of Systems and Technical Support for International Computers Ltd., ICL, reporting to the marketing manager who was in charge of sales, systems, and technical support throughout the world. Computer Limited in London. So I was offered the job. I accepted it, and I spent 7 years over there in that job. First thing what happened when I got to that job is he handed me a list of all the dissatisfied customers in the world that ICL had. And ICL had a lot of customers around the world in some of their territories, like Australia, New Zealand, that kind of thing. They were actually mostly owned by the government, so they had a lot of work to do to keep them happy. So I traveled the world with a small team whenever there was a problem, trying to save the customer in whatever country they were in from quitting ICL and going with IBM, Sperry Rand, or some other company. When I first joined, Managing Director Cross handed me a list of all the dissatisfied customers that the company had, and most of them were part owners of International Computers Limited. They were big companies around the world that owned part of ICL. And he turned to the marketing director, who was in charge of marketing around the world, and said, "Get out of Brian's way. Let him get in there and get the job done. Help him save these customers." So I set up a war room like we had in UNIVAC and began the process of saving the customers. After I was there a few years, they came out with a new range of computers that was very, very large and complex, and I was promoted to be the Director of Planning Control of the new range program, development and distribution around the world, reporting directly to the CEO. One of my mentors, Jeffrey R. Cross, and as a result, I then spent a challenging 3 or 4 years doing that. This added a lot of countries, communist, socialist, capitalist, to my repertoire. I traveled to all of them over time, got to know the countries, got to know their form of government, and learned a lot. After that, the president and one of my mentors, Jeffrey R. Cross, left ICL to join an American company headquartered in America and owned by the English, but chose to live in San Diego, California, where he purchased a company called Plessy Environmental Systems and changed the name to Grundy Environmental Systems. Stan Grundy was one of the early beginning investors in International Computers Limited. And he made a lot of the peripherals for them and things. He was an Englishman. The chairman and chief executive officer of Grundy Environmental Systems recruited me to come and be president of one of the largest environmental systems companies in the world, headquartered in San Diego, California. The company was called Grundy Environmental Systems, and we distributed, tested, built instruments, water quality monitoring instruments, all over the world to people like Jacques Cousteau and other oceanographers, limnologists, governments. Some were for military use, some were for non-military use. But I was there 7 years, and I was president and chief operating officer of that company until shortly before it was sold, and I was recruited to be president, chief executive officer of the venture capital-backed Internet Systems Corporation, located in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and connecting various computers to the Internet with the ITCP software. That was one of the earliest companies working on the Internet with the Department of Defense in Washington, D.C. I helped them raise money for the company and eventually helped the venture capitalists sell the company to another company in Washington, D.C. that was run by minorities and had a certain advantage when dealing with the government. During the last 3 or 4 months of my stay at Internet Systems Corporation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, I was being recruited by the up-and-coming Telerate Systems company in New York and New Jersey. They distributed financial information around the world to dealers, brokers, other people who bought and sold stocks and bonds. When Internet Systems Corporation was sold, there was no need for me, so I went for a few months while Telerate was making up their mind and trying to get permission from some of their stockholders to hire me. I worked for Software AG in Maryland for the president and CEO of their company as a consultant. I stayed at his home. I knew he, his wife, and children from previous jobs, and I eventually hired him to come and work with me at Telerate. So it's a small world when it comes to the computer industry that's fast growing and really mushrooming and offering opportunity to everybody all over the world that's qualified and willing to participate. Once Telerate made me their fine offer to come up and be the head of all their worldwide computer systems, headquartered in New Jersey, I was offered a job at Software AG, but turned that down to go to Telerate, move the family to Princeton, New Jersey from San Diego, California, and I was with Telerate for about 7 years and was highly thought of there. Got a big raise when the contract was up and they renewed it. But they were finally bought out by Dow Jones, and I worked for Dow Jones Telerate for a while. Then I was relieved of my contract, and I got another job shortly after working for NYNEX. People who knew me at Telerate, some of the people who did work for Telerate, recommended me to the vice president of computer systems at NYNEX before it was part of Verizon. So I was brought in to run their computers. They had somebody who actually ran the computers and the computer operations, but I was in charge of the worldwide software and distribution and all that kind of thing when I was there, reporting to the vice president. I was a director in that company. And when I left there, because they were bought out by Dow Jones and didn't need me anymore, I was recruited by another former contractor, and that was now the head of the IRS in Washington, D.C. So he asked me to come down for a couple of years with my small team of experts, designers, project managers, technical wizards, etc., consult to them and help them get through the year 2000 with the biggest real-time computer system in the world that the IRS has. Worked a lot in Maryland with them on that, but also in Washington, D.C. So Joyce and I moved down to Washington, D.C. for a couple of years. When that contract was up and they got through the year 2000, I then worked for a company that was rapidly growing in the software distribution around the world, setting up websites for people. I traveled quite a bit, again, trying to help them get customers working properly in England and America and other places. From there, I retired. I became vice president of that company before I retired, but the hecticness of me running around the world and a little bit and then this and that was a little too much for my family, so at the age of 62, I decided to retire and come to our house. It used to be a cottage, but we grew it from year to year into a year-round home at Highland Lake in Winsted, Connecticut. That was in 2002. Since then, I've been trying to help everybody in town grow the grand list. I had to try to help people get permits all over the place because it's difficult to get permits, especially on the lakes and Winchester in our town. I tried to help the conservative Democrats. I tried to help the Republicans. I tried to help the unaffiliated and the Taxpayers Association, and I got a lot done. But I didn't get done as much as I wanted to, so now we're running for office, and if there's enough people that win seats in this election, that I think I can work with to get something done, then I'll serve for 2 years if I get elected. If I don't think I can get anything done because the wrong people are elected with me, then I won't accept the position, and it'll go to the next highest vote getter, I guess, one way or the other, because I don't belong to any political party. Now remember, 50% of our voters in this town are unaffiliated. 25% or so are Republicans, and 25% are Democrats, and then there's a few here and there, 50, 60, that are in the independent party. And so I don't want to sit there for 2 years with a lot of people who don't ever get anything done. I don't want to see the town keep going backwards. I don't want to be that close. I got other things to do. I'll finish writing my book, Life in the Fast Lane, and I'll probably finish writing my book, The Financial Implosion of a Small New England Town, and spend my time helping other people around the world that do accept my advice, don't give me a hard time, and want to get things done. I don't have too many hobbies now. I walk a lot. This program, one way or another, with different names, has been going for 15 years or so. I probably won't do any more programs after the election, unless some emergency arises. I do them at my home. That's why you don't see my picture up anymore, because it's easier for me to do it at home in my own time than to organize time at the studio and get all the cameras set up and blah, 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 and then edit it. I did learn how to edit from the local charter station. I bought the software that they use down there. I learned how to use this editing software, and I ask them questions whenever I have a problem editing, and they teach me, and I learn bit by bit by bit from week to week and month to month and year to year, and now I can edit the programs myself. That's why they're not perfect. I also record at all times of the day and night, so sometimes you'll hear my voice sound a little funny because I either got up early or I stayed up too late. So anyway, that's what we're doing now, is we're going to try to trump Winsted. Whether we can or we cannot, we'll know. I went down to the town hall today after I saw a Democratic sign in someone's yard that said they were in row A on the ballot for November 7th, the election at Pearson School. So I went down to the town hall and I said, well, where am I? And they said, well, you're on row D, but you're also on row C because you've been endorsed by the Winsted Independent Party. So that's where you'll find me when you go to vote. If you do go to vote, that's where you'll find me. I'll be the first in the row on both C and D. Don't ask me why. But I'll be the first in each row. And they draw usually for numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. in each row. I didn't go to that drawing, although I was invited, because I didn't think it was that important for me. But of course, on the Winsted Independent Party, there are 3 candidates. Somehow I came out number 1. Somebody else was 2 and 3 in the row. Must have been drawn that way. On the Trump-Winsted Party, I'm the only one running. So I'm number 1 in the row. So look for Brian M. O'Haron, either in the Trump-Winsted Party or in the Winsted Independent Party, and you should find my name to check if you do want to vote for me. But if you want business as usual, and you don't want the town to do better, but to stay status quo, as we have been ever since I retired here in 2002. Matter of fact, we got worse instead of better. Then don't vote for me. Vote for the others. I'm going to tell you now some of the people that I, as an individual, will vote for. I haven't totally made up my mind, but I know that I'll vote for Tard Oshalowski. I will vote for him with my own personal vote. I can't recommend any parties or endorse any people
from the Trump Winsted party, but as an individual, resident, taxpayer, voter in the town of Winsted, or city of Winsted, town of Winchester, I can say who I'm going to vote for as a private individual. So Todd Archelashi will be number one. He's a Republican running outside the party as a petitioning candidate. He has name recognition and he'll want to do the right thing for the town. His father used to be a police chief and other things in this town, and Todd means well, so vote for him. Jerry Martinez, who's a conservative Republican running on the Winsted Independent Party ticket and not backed by his own party. He's in a minority on the Planning and Zoning Commission, but he can do a lot of good as a selectman because he knows how to add and subtract. Will be number two. I like Candace Bouchard. She's a conservative Republican who's done a lot for the town when she was mayor and when she was on the board before she was mayor. She's numerate. She has a balance. She knows how to handle money. She knows how to add and subtract, but she also knows how to help the town out by doing jobs around town, helping to clean things up, working with the Friends of Main Street, all that kind of thing. So, perfect? No. But of the candidates, one of the best. On the Democratic side, I only like one of the candidates, and that's Selectman Bork, because I think he's got the right idea. He was a businessman. He asks the right kind of questions. He even asks a question to me once in a while, and I try to give him the answer. But I think he can help. So if you elect these four people with me, I think we can do good for the town. We can help Bob Geiger, the great town manager we have now. We can have him help us find the next town manager when he doesn't want to stay any longer, if that occurs during our tenure. We can help the finance director, and we can try to implement many of the planks on my platform and to operate with my deportment promises. Now, I'm sure they don't agree with all of the platform or the deportment promises, but I'm sure that they'll work as a team to try to do the best for the town. They don't have a lake to preserve. They don't have a Winchester to preserve. They're trying to work for the best of the town as a whole. And they're not in my backyard people, like the people at the lake are. Many of them, not all of them. Most of them aren't. But the ones that get in office are not in my backyarders. And the same with Winchester, the town of Winchester. Most people up there are well balanced, but the ones that get into office tend to be not in my backyard development type people. And that's hurt us. It's hurt the Grand List. It's hurt the whole town over the years since I've been retired in 2002. It will continue to hurt the whole town unless you do something about changing out the current finance board, which is, of course, the Board of Selectmen. You don't need somebody who can't vote on 61% of the budget and has to recuse himself and leave the room when they discuss it. That's the school budget. You don't want somebody who's been in there for 12 terms or so, give or take, and the whole town has imploded during that 12 years, or 12 2-year periods. That's 24 years. That's a long time. You have other people that are running that are very nice, most likely as individuals, but they're not good for the town because they don't have enough experience. They don't have the kind of experience that I've got and that the town needs to help Bob Geiger and Bruce Stratford and the fine financial team we have now in place to manage, protect, and help spend our money. What we do need to do is get more revenue in town. You can read a lot of articles in the paper about the sidewalks being bad and we need 6 to 8 million for that, and the schools being bad and we need a whole bunch of money for that, and the roads being bad and we need a whole bunch of money for that. But then you get them come to a selectman meeting one time last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever, and they didn't even have an agenda. They were thinking of canceling the meeting. You always see what the expenditure problems are, but they never tackle the revenue side in their finance board and selectmen meetings. It's not number one on the agenda like I would like to see it be. That's for sure. So we need to get in a team that will change all that 180 degrees, turn it right around. It's not good. What's happening now is not good for Winsted, especially with the state crashing down upon us with the ECS grant money and perhaps other money they want to cut from the towns and cities. We don't know. We still don't have a budget yet. By the time this program is shown, maybe we will have one, but I doubt it. I think in the end, the governor's just going to say, well, here's the budget. Go live with it. Here's the budget. Well, that's not my view. I think you got to get in some good people here, and despite the problems in the state, you've got to come up with a plan to save Winsted, town of Winchester, city of Winsted. You got to do it. Make the tough decisions, just like I had to make when I went around the world trying to save the customers for many different companies. You got to work together. If I didn't have the CEOs in my own company backing me and helping me, I would have never made it. So we need to get people in there that can help Bob Geiger and Bruce Stratford, that can help them make Winsted great again. And that won't be easy. That won't be easy at all. Especially if you vote for the same old candidates that are controlled by their party and have to make decisions based upon what their party wants them to say rather than what they think themselves. And remember now, these town committees, they don't vote in people onto their committees unless they agree to vote their way. Pretty strong person who will stand up to their own party. And this time around, you've seen Todd Arcelasi move out of his party and run as a petitioning candidate. Glenn Albanesius wasn't backed by his party. He was a selectman. So you had 2 selectmen from the Republican Party that weren't backed by their own party. Now, it's a little different on the Democratic side. They had one person drop off, and they're putting up a name recognition candidate in his place, because they still believe, and I believe too, that name recognition, not financial astuteness, is how you win elections in Winsted. It's kind of similar in Torrington too, from what I see. So nothing's easy. It's all very difficult. But it's up to you. It's up to you, the voters, to see through all this. I recommended some people to you. If you vote for them and you vote for me, then maybe we can get something done here. And maybe we can't. We still won't have much control over 61% of the budget, which is the school systems. And on my platform, you'll see, tied for number 1 with growing the grand list is resolving the exorbitant expenses in our school systems. 2 superintendents, 2 this, 2 that, sometimes 3 of things. If you include the town, 3 maintenance departments, 3 purchasing departments, 3 receiving departments, that kind of thing. So let's go. Let's vote right this time. Don't follow the leader. Don't be like sheep. They're counting on you. counting on you to be like sheep. Just look at the Democratic sign. The Democratic sign says, let's keep things going the way they are, basically. And that's not my view. I think we need to drain the swamp. Yep, we need to drain the swamp. Get out the old, get in the new. Drain the swamp, as Donald Trump would say. We need to change the way we do things. We need to try to make Winsted great again. And we got to do that by draining the swamp. You can't have the same old people in there that got you in this jam in the first place. You got to change them. If you change them, then you can get at the P&Z board and the ZBA board over 10 or 15 years. That's what it'll take. And you can implement a lot of the other things that I've mentioned in my platform and the 11 planks that are in that platform and the deportment promises that I put on the other side of the platform. I'm not running a high-profile campaign. You'll see a few signs of mine around. I only bought about 30 of them, maybe 40. And a few people have asked for signs, and they're putting them up. I don't push them on any. But there are people who ask for them, and there are people who ask for the bumper stickers, but they don't really want to put them on because somebody might break the window in their car or truck. But they do like the platform and the deportment promises. And they do like to see my background in business over almost the 80 years of my life in 2 more months. 2 months from the election, I'll be 80 years old. And I got a lot of experience working since I was 13, and maybe even since I was working since I was 11. Because my mother told me, Brian, you have to work. And I say the same thing to the town. Winsted and Winchester, you have to work. You have to get a job. You have to grow the grand list. And you have to manage the expenses. Like my mother told me when I was 11 years old, Brian, you have to work. Don't forget to vote, you raggies, you Winsted raggies. I know you had your annual meeting, and perhaps my name was mentioned. Vote for me. And remember, I'll probably only be giving interviews to one newspaper before the election. Good night to all. Brian O'Hearn, Episode 17. Thank you for sticking it out. For those of you who did tonight, I know it isn't easy, but I'll see you again soon as we get closer and closer to making Winsted great again by voting properly in the November election and hopefully getting most of the candidates to agree to stick to the universal platform and planks that I have put together and received feedback on from many, many people around town and the state. Please help to make Winsted great again in the November election. On November 7th, 2017, by sending a clear message to our town leaders, vote row C or D. Good night, Brian M. O'Haron. On the ballot, Trump Winsted or Winston Independent Party.